Michael Harris had grown used to the sound of silence in his small home on the outskirts of Joliet, Illinois. Nights stretched long and heavy, filled with the hollow tick of a clock on the kitchen wall. He was 32, a man who once believed life could be simple and good, but the years had chipped away at him, until hope felt like a stranger he hadn't seen in ages. Ever since Sarah, his wife and anchor, passed away 3 winters ago, his world had become a long corridor of grief and quiet struggle. The wind outside rattled the windows, carrying with it the bite of another Midwest winter. Snow piled on the sidewalks, burying cars and forcing neighbors indoors. For Michael, the cold was more than weather. It was a reflection of how his life felt, barren, unforgiving, endless. He rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the chill that had settled deep into his bones, but no amount of rubbing could warm a spirit as weary as his. He worked as a mechanic in town, patching up worn-out trucks for farmers and repairing rust-bitten sedans for neighbors who could barely afford to keep them running. The work was honest, but the pay barely covered the mortgage, and some nights he skipped dinner to stretch his savings. He told himself it didn't matter. Food was easier to sacrifice than the house. At least the house held the memories of Sarah, the photographs still on the wall, the coat she used to wear hanging in the closet like a relic he couldn't bear to move. But Michael's heart wasn't only heavy with grief and bills, it was heavy with silence from above. Once a devout churchgoer, he hadn't prayed sincerely in years. Whenever he tried, the words felt hollow, as though God had turned his face away. He asked himself daily, if God exists, why did he take Sarah so soon? Why leave me with nothing but this emptiness? Faith, to Michael, was a memory fading like breath on glass. Yet even in his despair, kindness had not abandoned him. He held on to small courtesies, giving what little he had when others needed it more. He wasn't a man of speeches or grandeur, but he believed in small mercies, gestures that might soften the edges of a hard life. And on one freezing night in Chicago, those gestures would change everything. The story begins here. A man with nothing to offer but the coat of his late wife, meeting a stranger whose smile would alter the course of his existence. Before we step into that night, before you witness the moment when Michael's life is touched by something extraordinary, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Stories like this remind us that even in the bleakest hours, light can break through. And the next chapter of Michael's journey will not only inspire you but stay with you. So go ahead, subscribe, and let's walk with him into the cold. Michael had taken the train to Chicago that day, chasing the faint possibility of steadier work. A factory on the west side was hiring, and though the pay wasn't glamorous, it promised consistency. He couldn't afford hope, yet he carried it anyway, tucked away like loose change in his pocket. After the interview, he stepped out into the bitter night near Union Station. The air was sharp, stinging his lungs with each breath, and the streets shimmered with icy slush. People hurried past him, wrapped in heavy coats, scarves, and gloves, their eyes fixed forward, determined to escape the cold. That was when he saw her. A woman stood near the entrance, shivering violently. Her clothes were thin, unsuited for the weather, her arms wrapped around herself in a desperate attempt to trap what little warmth she had left. She looked fragile, as though the winter might swallow her whole. Michael froze, torn between his own poverty and the instinct to help. His gaze drifted to the coat he wore, Sarah's old coat, thick wool, warm enough to keep a man alive on a night like this. His throat tightened. That coat was his last connection to her, the garment she once buttoned as they walked together under snowy skies. To part with it would be like losing her all over again. And yet, as the woman's eyes met his, something stirred inside him. Her gaze wasn't pleading but calm, almost serene. Still, her trembling frame was undeniable proof of suffering. Michael's heart pounded as he took a slow breath, staring at the coat that carried Sarah's memory. Would he keep it, holding on to the past, or let it go, offering warmth to a stranger? And with that question, the night and his life hung in delicate balance. The train ride back from Chicago was long and heavy, but Michael had grown used to carrying burdens. When he stepped off at the small Joliet station, the familiar chill cut deeper than the city wind. The lights in town flickered against the snow, dim beacons that reminded him he was home, not because it brought comfort, but because there was nowhere else to go. Michael's daily life was a grind of repetition. Mornings began before sunrise. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, drank it black and left without breakfast. The garage where he worked smelled of gasoline and iron, its floors streaked with grease and oil. He spent his hours bent over engines, tightening bolts, welding broken parts, and coaxing tired vehicles back to life. Customers often looked at him with gratitude, though rarely with enough money to pay promptly. One afternoon, a farmer named Clay leaned against the counter, hat in hand, guilt in his eyes. "Mike, I'll get you the money next month. Calves are sick and I can't spare a dime right now," Clay muttered. Michael wiped his hands on a rag, sighing quietly. "Just take the truck, Clay. You need it more than I need the cash today." Clay looked at him, ashamed. "You're too good for your own good, you know that?" Michael forced a faint smile. "Maybe, but you'll pay me when you can." These moments kept Michael human, but they also pushed him closer to the edge of ruin. Bills piled up. His landlord called twice a week. The mortgage company's letters stacked unopened on the counter, like warnings written in bold red ink. At night, when the garage door finally closed and the hum of machines ceased, loneliness struck hardest. He would walk back to his modest house, unlock the door, and face the silence waiting inside. Sarah's picture rested on the mantelpiece, her smile captured forever in a frame. He often sat across from it, talking to her as though she might answer. "Sarah, I'm trying," he whispered one evening, eyes burning from exhaustion. "I'm holding it together, but it feels like I'm just falling apart slower." The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the absence. No laughter filling the kitchen, no voice humming along with the radio while dinner simmered. No warmth on the other side of the bed. Winter only deepened the emptiness. His father, a stern man named John Harris, never offered comfort. A retired veteran, John carried discipline like a shield and saw emotion as weakness. "You've got to toughen up, Mike," John told him one Sunday when Michael visited. "Life doesn't care if you're hurting. You just get up and keep moving." Michael clenched his jaw. "I am moving, Dad. I'm working every day. But sometimes it feels like I'm walking in circles," John grunted, lighting another cigarette. "Then walk faster. Sitting around feeling sorry for yourself won't bring her back." The words stung, but Michael didn't argue. He rarely did. His father had never been the type to understand grief in gentle terms, yet deep down Michael longed for him to say something different, something softer. Even his co-workers noticed the weight he carried. In the lunchroom, a mechanic named Eddie shook his head. "Man, you've had the worst luck of anyone I know. But I'll say this, you never stop showing up. I don't know how you do it." Michael shrugged, forcing a half-hearted chuckle. "I don't know either. Guess it's all I've got left, just showing up." Faith, once a steady current in his life, had dried up. He hadn't set foot in a church since Sarah's funeral. Sometimes he passed by St. Mary's downtown and caught the faint sound of bells. Instead of drawing him in, the sound reminded him of absence. He would tighten his coat and walk faster, pretending it didn't matter. But it did matter. Every night when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan that never spun, he wondered if God still listened, or if he had stopped caring altogether. Still, despite the doubt, Michael kept living. He kept working, he kept enduring, and though he didn't know it yet, his persistence through this ordinary suffering was preparing him for something far from ordinary. The night in Chicago pressed down on Michael like a weight. The wind tunneled between buildings, sharp and merciless, carrying flecks of snow that stung against his skin. He tugged Sarah's coat tighter around him, burying his hands in its deep pockets. It was the only barrier between him and the cutting cold, the one thing that made the walk from Union Station bearable. His job interview had drained him. Hours of waiting, followed by a panel of men who measured him with skeptical eyes. He wasn't sure if he had impressed them or if his words had simply vanished into the air. All he knew was that his body ached and his heart was weary. The streets around the station pulsed with movement. Commuters hurried home, taxis honked, and steam curled up from grates on the sidewalks. Everyone seemed wrapped in thick coats, heads down, intent on surviving the winter night. Michael blended into the crowd, until his eyes caught on someone who didn't fit the rhythm. Near the stone steps of the station, a woman stood alone. She wore a thin sweater, threadbare and unsuited for the temperature. Her arms hugged her body tightly, and her lips trembled with each breath. She looked fragile, as though one gust of wind could knock her to the ground. Michael slowed his pace, confusion and concern stirring inside him. People passed her by without a glance, the way city dwellers often do, too accustomed to suffering to notice it anymore. His footsteps hesitated. He thought of the bus schedule, the train back to Joliet, the bills waiting at home. He thought of Sarah's coat, the last piece of her he still carried. His chest tightened as his mind waged war against his heart. She'll freeze out here, he thought. But this coat, it's all I have left of her. The woman's head lifted slightly and their eyes met. Her gaze was calm, strangely steady for someone trembling from the cold. Michael felt the moment stretch, as if the city's noise dulled and time slowed. Something unspoken passed between them, something that reached deeper than words. He approached cautiously, voice roughened by the wind. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her lips parted, but instead of speaking, she gave a faint smile. Not one of joy or relief, but a smile that seemed both gentle and eternal, as though she carried a peace beyond the suffering of the moment. It unsettled him, yet drew him closer. "You can't stay out here like this," he pressed, swallowing hard. "It's too cold. You'll—" His words faltered. She continued to smile, silent, watching him as though waiting for his decision. His hands trembled as he unbuttoned Sarah's coat. Every click of the buttons was a small act of surrender. He remembered Sarah laughing in this very coat, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, her arm looped through his. He remembered the scent of her perfume lingering in its fibers. Removing it now felt like tearing open an old wound, yet he draped it over the woman's shoulders anyway. The wool hung loose around her, swallowing her small frame. For the first time the trembling eased. "There," Michael murmured, voice hoarse. "At least now you've got something warm." The woman's smile widened ever so slightly. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to glimmer, not with gratitude alone, but with something higher, something Michael couldn't place. He blinked, shaken by the intensity of her gaze. Then, as quickly as it had happened, the moment ended. People brushed past them, the city roared on, and Michael found himself stepping back, uncertain of what he had just done. He turned away, his chest heavy with loss, yet strangely light with relief. His arms felt naked without the coat, but inside him stirred an unfamiliar warmth. As he walked into the night, the image of her serene smile followed him, pressing against his thoughts like a shadow he could not shake. And though he didn't know it yet, that single choice, letting go of the coat, had set something extraordinary into motion. The train rocked gently as Michael sat with his arms wrapped tightly around himself. Without Sarah's coat, the cold gnawed at him, sinking through the thin fabric of his shirt. Yet it wasn't only the chill that unsettled him, it was the woman's smile. He couldn't shake it. The serenity in her eyes lingered in his memory like a song he couldn't forget. Back in Joliet, the wind howled through the streets, rattling old signs and scattering loose snow across cracked sidewalks. Michael walked home from the station, his breath rising in white clouds, his body shivering violently. But even as his teeth chattered, his mind circled the memory of that silent stranger. He had expected gratitude, maybe even desperation. Instead, she had given him a smile that felt timeless, as if it belonged to another world. That night, sleep came restlessly. When it finally took him, it carried him into a dream more vivid than any he had known in years. He stood in a field of light, the snow replaced by warmth. A figure approached, clothed in radiance, face hidden yet gentle. The figure reached out a hand, and as it touched his chest, Michael felt peace ripple through him. He woke suddenly, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The image burned into him, a blessing in silence, a presence too profound to dismiss as random. In the morning, over bitter coffee, he tried to reason it away. "It was just a dream," he muttered aloud. "I've been tired, that's all." But the words didn't convince him. At the garage, Eddie noticed Michael's distracted state. "You all right, man?" "You've been staring at that carburetor for 20 minutes. Michael blinked. "Yeah, just didn't sleep much." Eddie smirked. "What's new? You look like you saw a ghost." Michael hesitated. "Not a ghost. Just something strange happened in Chicago." Eddie raised a brow. "Strange how?" Michael shook his head, suddenly embarrassed. "Never mind. You'd just laugh." But Eddie pressed. Finally, Michael confessed in fragments. About the woman, the coat, the smile. Eddie leaned back, a half grin spreading. "Man, you're reading too much into it. Probably some homeless lady happy she didn't freeze to death. You're tired, that's all." The dismissal stung, though Michael had expected it. Later, when he told his father, the response was sharper. "You gave away your only decent coat?" John barked over the phone. "For what, some stranger? You can't afford to be playing the hero, Mike." Michael's jaw tightened. "She needed it more than I did." "What she needed was a shelter, not your memories. Sarah's coat. Mike, that was all you had left, and you just handed it over." Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. "It didn't feel like I had a choice," John scoffed. "That's not God talking, that's guilt. Don't get carried away with superstition." The words dug deep, but they didn't erase the truth gnawing at Michael's chest. Something about the encounter was different. It wasn't pity, wasn't guilt, wasn't coincidence. It was as if the woman's eyes had carried an entire universe inside them, and her smile had left a mark he couldn't explain. That evening, as he stepped outside to take the trash to the curb, the wind shifted. It swirled around him suddenly, not like a gust, but like a whisper. For a heartbeat he thought he heard Sarah's voice, or maybe something softer, older. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The air seemed alive, brushing against his skin with a strange gentleness. The sound faded, leaving only the winter's silence. Michael stood motionless, his heart hammering. Was it grief playing tricks? Or was it a sign? Either way, he could no longer pretend it was nothing. The morning after the strange whisper in the wind, Michael left for work expecting another day of grinding fatigue and unpaid bills. Instead, the phone call came before lunch. The factory in Chicago, the one where he had walked out certain he had failed, was offering him the job. His chest tightened as the manager's voice explained the details. A steady paycheck, better hours, benefits. It sounded unreal, like a door opening where he had only ever found walls. "Are you serious?" Michael asked, gripping the receiver so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Dead serious," the manager replied. "We were impressed with your persistence. You start Monday." When he hung up, Eddie slapped him on the back. "Well, look at that. Guess luck finally decided to visit you." Michael managed a weak smile. "Yeah, luck." But deep down, he wondered, could it really be luck? That night, another surprise awaited him. A letter from the insurance company arrived, one he had been dreading. For months he expected bad news, more debt, another reason to sink. Instead, the envelope contained a check. An error in the system had overcharged him for years, and now they were refunding nearly $2,000. His hands shook as he read the paper over and over. 2,000, he whispered into the empty room. This doesn't happen to me. The following week brought even more unexpected relief. A distant cousin he hadn't spoken to in years reached out, apologizing for past family rifts and offering to repay an old debt his father had forgotten. It wasn't much, but it chipped away at Michael's overdue bills. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest loosened. But it wasn't just money. Michael felt lighter in ways that had nothing to do with his wallet. The exhaustion that clung to his body seemed to lift. His back pain, constant since his early days at the garage, eased. He even caught himself humming as he worked, a habit he hadn't indulged in since Sarah was alive. Small joys began sneaking back into his days. At the grocery store, a stranger let him go ahead in line with a smile. On the bus to Chicago, a child offered him a lollipop and giggled when he accepted. These little moments stitched themselves together, forming a quiet melody of grace he couldn't ignore. One evening, while standing in the kitchen making dinner, Michael paused mid-stir, staring at the pot of soup. "What's happening to me?" he murmured. His voice trembled with awe. "Why does it feel like the world's shifting in my favor?" He thought of the woman, the thin sweater, the trembling frame, and that mysterious, serene smile. It was impossible not to connect the blessings to her. It felt as though, by giving away Sarah's coat, he had opened a door to something beyond comprehension. But when he mentioned this to his father, the response was sharp as ever. "You're seeing patterns where there are none," John said over the phone. "Jobs, checks, debts, those things happen. Don't go making it into some divine fairy tale." Michael clenched the receiver. "Maybe they do happen, but not to me. Not like this." "Mike," John sighed, "you've been through hell. Don't trick yourself into thinking some stranger's smile fixed your life." The words echoed long after the call ended. Yet, in his heart, Michael felt a certainty his father couldn't shake. Something was moving in his life, something he couldn't explain away. Late at night, lying in bed, he closed his eyes and whispered into the dark. "If this is you, God, if this is really you, I don't know what to say except thank you." And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. The more Michael's life seemed to open up, the more those around him pulled the reins, reminding him not to get carried away. To them, his good fortune was nothing more than coincidence strung together, but Michael felt differently. He couldn't shake the sense that each blessing was connected to that moment at Union Station, the coat, the woman, and the smile that still haunted him. At work, the conversations turned sharp. Eddie, never shy with his opinions, leaned against a toolbox one afternoon, grinning as Michael spoke about his new job. "Listen, man," Eddie said, waving a wrench for emphasis. "You got lucky. That's all. Don't turn it into some miracle. Jobs don't fall from the sky because you gave someone a jacket." Michael wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "I'm not saying it was magic. I'm saying it feels like something more. Like maybe, just maybe, God's hand was in it." Eddie burst out laughing, the sound echoing off the garage walls. "God's hand? Mike, come on, you've been through enough. Don't start chasing fairy tales." The laughter stung, but worse was the dismissal. Michael lowered his eyes, choosing silence over argument. Still, the words lodged like thorns in his chest. That weekend he visited his father. John sat on the porch with his usual cigarette, the winter air clouding around him. His tone carried no softness when Michael brought up his recent blessings. "You're telling me you think God handed you a job because you gave away a coat?" John's voice was gruff, almost mocking. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. Maybe he's showing me something. Maybe he's answering prayers I stopped praying a long time ago." John blew smoke into the air, shaking his head. "You sound like your mother, always searching for signs." "Let me tell you something, Mike. The world doesn't work that way. You work hard, sometimes things turn around, that's it." Michael clenched his fists, fighting the frustration rising in his throat. "What if you're wrong? What if there's more to it than chance?" John flicked ash from his cigarette. "Then you'd better be careful. Hope makes a man weak when it isn't rooted in reality." The words cut deep. Michael left his father's house feeling heavier than when he'd arrived, but the longing inside him only grew. That Sunday, after years of staying away, Michael pushed open the doors of St. Mary's. The air inside was warm and faintly perfumed with incense. Candles flickered near the altar, their small flames steady against the stillness. He slid into a pew at the back, hands gripping the wood as if to anchor himself. The Mass had already begun. Voices rose in hymns he remembered from childhood, the sound stirring memories of simpler days. Yet he felt like an outsider, like a man peering into a world that no longer belonged to him. His clothes smelled of oil and sweat, and his doubts weighed heavier than any hymn could lift. After the service, as people filtered out, a priest approached him. Father Thomas, an older man with kind eyes and lines carved by years of listening, smiled gently. "I don't think I've seen you here before," the priest said. Michael hesitated. "It's been a long time. What brought you back today?" Michael lowered his gaze. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to sit here. Maybe I'm trying to make sense of things." Father Thomas nodded slowly. "That's reason enough. God has a way of calling us back when we least expect it." The words settled in Michael's heart like a quiet ember. For the first time in years, he felt less like a man wandering alone, and more like someone being gently led. But even as hope flickered, the voices of doubt from his friends and father echoed louder, forcing him to question whether he was truly experiencing grace or simply losing his grip on reality. The following week began with optimism. Michael had started training at his new job in Chicago, commuting by bus each morning with a thermos of coffee and a cautious sense of hope. The factory floor smelled of oil and fresh paint, the hum of machines loud but strangely reassuring. For once, he felt as if life was finally moving forward, but hope has a way of being tested. One frigid morning, as Michael prepared to leave Joliet, his old car sputtered and died in the driveway. He twisted the key again and again, but the engine only coughed before giving up entirely. Steam hissed from beneath the hood. He leaned back in the driver's seat, jaw tight. The bus to Chicago was already gone, and without the car, his job was at risk. "Not now," he muttered, slamming the steering wheel. "Please, not now." By the time he stepped out, the cold gnawed through his jacket, his breath rising in clouds. He popped the hood, staring helplessly at the maze of wires and belts. Normally, he would have the patience to fix it, but today, the weight of what was at stake crushed him. Missing a day of training could mean losing the job altogether. A neighbor, Mrs. Lopez, shuffled down the street, wrapped in a scarf. "Car trouble again, Michael?" she called out, concern in her voice. "Yeah," he admitted, wiping his brow despite the cold. "And today of all days I can't miss work." She pursed her lips. "Wait here." Within minutes she returned with her teenage grandson, Danny, who carried a toolbox. Together they leaned under the hood. Danny worked quickly, his hands moving with surprising skill. Michael watched in stunned silence as the boy adjusted a loose belt and tightened a clamp. Within half an hour the engine roared back to life. "Try it now," Danny said, stepping back. Michael turned the key and the car vibrated to life. Relief flooded him so strongly he nearly laughed. "I don't know what to say. You just saved my job." Danny shrugged with a small grin. "Grandma says you've helped people plenty of times. Guess it's your turn." Michael looked at Mrs. Lopez, who smiled warmly. "See, kindness circles back." "Don't forget that." The words struck him deeper than he expected. As he drove off toward Chicago, he replayed them in his mind. Kindness circles back. It sounded simple, almost cliché, yet it carried a truth he had been witnessing again and again. Still, the day left him shaken. At the factory, he arrived late but explained honestly. His supervisor, surprisingly patient, waved him in. "Just don't make a habit of it, Harris. We need people who show up." That evening, sitting alone in his kitchen, Michael reflected on what had happened. For years he had felt cursed, as if every effort was doomed to collapse. But lately, whenever hardship struck, help arrived just in time, through strangers, neighbors, or even chance. It was as though he was being taught something, piece by piece. He whispered into the silence, almost afraid of the words. "Is this you again, God? Are you showing me I'm not alone?" The silence didn't answer, but his chest felt less heavy. The fear of losing everything still lingered, yet alongside it was a strange, steady calm. For the first time in years, Michael believed trials weren't punishments. They were lessons. And with each one, he felt himself being reshaped into someone stronger, someone who could still believe in grace despite the cold. What he didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning. The tests ahead would challenge not just his endurance, but his very understanding of the miracle that had entered his life. Michael's routine in Chicago settled into a rhythm. Early mornings on the bus, long shifts at the factory, and evenings spent trying to hold on to the fragile peace that had begun to grow in him. Yet, beneath the surface of this new order, a restlessness stirred. He couldn't shake the sense that the blessings, the trials, even the help from neighbors were threads weaving into something greater. And always at the center of it was her smile, the stranger's calm, luminous expression that refused to fade from his memory. One icy evening after work, Michael decided to stop by St. Mary's. The warmth of the church called to him, though he still felt like an intruder whenever he entered. The pews creaked under his weight as he sat near the back, head bowed. Candles flickered in the dim sanctuary, and the faint scent of incense hung in the air. He whispered softly, "If you're really out there, I don't need riches. I don't need anything big. I just need to know you haven't forgotten me." When he left, pulling his thin jacket tighter against the Chicago wind, he noticed someone standing near the steps of the church. A woman, slender and still, her figure illuminated faintly by the glow of a nearby street lamp. Michael's breath caught. The coat he had given away was gone, replaced by simple white clothing that fluttered lightly in the breeze. It was her. He froze, heart hammering, unable to believe his eyes. The same serene smile curved her lips. The same peaceful gaze met his. For a moment the world around him faded. The honking cars, the crunch of boots on icy sidewalks, the chatter of passers-by. All that remained was her presence, calm and radiant in its simplicity. He stepped closer, words fumbling in his throat. "It's you. How is this possible? I gave you Sarah's coat. His voice cracked. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head gently as though acknowledging his confusion. Then, in a voice soft as the wind, she said only, "Thank you." Michael's breath trembled. The words were so ordinary, yet they rang with a depth that pierced him. He blinked, fighting back a rush of emotion, but when he looked again, she was gone, vanished into the night as though she had never been there. He spun around, searching the street, but there was nothing. Just strangers hurrying past, indifferent to his desperation. His pulse raced, his body shaking not from the cold, but from awe. That night, unable to keep the encounter to himself, he sought out Father Thomas. The priest listened patiently as Michael poured out the story, the second appearance, the words, the sudden disappearance. His voice trembled with both fear and wonder. "I'm not crazy," Michael insisted, gripping the edge of the chair in the rectory. "I know what I saw. She looked at me, Father, like she knew me. And when she spoke, those two words, something inside me, shifted." Father Thomas folded his hands, his gaze steady. "Michael, there are moments when heaven brushes against earth. Most people pass by without noticing, but sometimes someone is chosen to see. What you describe, it may not be imagination. It may be grace." Michael's throat tightened. "Grace? Why me? I'm no saint. I've doubted, I've cursed, I'm nothing special." The priest leaned forward. "That's exactly why it may be you. God often chooses the broken, not the perfect. You gave what you could out of love, even when it cost you. That act might have opened your eyes to something extraordinary." Michael sat in stunned silence, the priest's words echoing inside him. A mixture of fear, disbelief, and hope battled in his chest. Could it really be possible that the woman wasn't just a stranger, but something far beyond what he had imagined? As he walked home, the memory of her smile blazed brighter than ever, no longer just an echo of the past, but a living presence, waiting to unfold its meaning. The following days dragged Michael into a storm of confusion. At first, the encounter outside the church filled him with wonder, but the more he replayed it in his mind, the more the edges blurred. He began to ask himself whether he had imagined it all. Fatigue, grief, loneliness. They had clouded his thoughts before. Maybe they had tricked him again. At the factory, the constant thrum of machinery gave his mind too much room to wander. He tightened bolts and checked gauges, but his thoughts refused to quiet. During lunch break, Eddie noticed his distracted state. "You're looking worse by the day, Harris," Eddie said, biting into his sandwich. "What's going on with you?" Michael hesitated. He had promised himself not to talk about the woman again, but the words slipped out. "I think I saw her again. The woman I told you about." Eddie groaned loudly. "Not this again. You've been working too many hours." "She's not some angel or spirit, Mike. She's a homeless woman who probably found a shelter. You need to let it go." Michael's jaw clenched. "You didn't see her eyes. You didn't hear her voice." Eddie rolled his eyes. "You sound like you're losing it, man. Don't start talking like that to the wrong people. They'll think you're unstable." The warning stung more than the dismissal. As Michael rode the bus home that night, he kept hearing Eddie's voice. Unstable. He already carried the weight of his father's scorn. Could it be true that grief had cracked something inside him? At home, the walls felt tighter than usual, the silence heavier. He sat at the kitchen table, Sarah's photograph in front of him. Her smile, once a comfort, now pressed on him like a reminder of everything he had lost. He whispered, "Am I losing my mind, Sarah? Or did something real happen to me?" His voice broke, and the photo gave no answer. The following Sunday, he returned to church, hoping for clarity. But instead of peace, he felt out of place. The hymns rang hollow. Families filled the pews around him, their voices lifting in unison, while he sat alone, convinced he didn't belong. The joy of others only sharpened his own emptiness. After the service, Father Thomas greeted him. "Michael, good to see you again. How are you holding up?" Michael hesitated, then muttered, "I think I'm losing it, Father. I thought I saw her again, but maybe I'm just desperate. Maybe I'm just broken." The priest studied him quietly before replying, "Doubt doesn't mean madness, Michael. Doubt is often the soil where faith begins to grow." But Michael shook his head, overwhelmed. "No, I don't deserve signs. I don't deserve blessings. I've cursed God more times than I can count. Why would he send anyone to me?" The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because grace is not about what we deserve. It's about what we're given." Michael wanted to believe him, but the words felt too heavy, too bright for the darkness he carried. He nodded politely and left quickly, unable to bear the weight of hope that might only collapse again. That night, as snow fell softly outside his window, Michael sat in bed staring at the ceiling. A battle raged inside him, between the possibility of a miracle and the fear of delusion. "Why me?" he whispered into the dark. "Why would heaven waste a smile on someone like me?" The silence pressed back, cold and unyielding. His chest ached with the certainty that maybe he had been wrong, that maybe all of it, every blessing, every glimpse, was nothing but coincidence and the desperate imagination of a grieving man. And with that thought, Michael felt himself sink back into the shadows he thought he had escaped. The storm hit Joliet without warning, a wall of snow sweeping across the Midwest like a white curtain drawn over the town. Streets emptied, windows shuttered, and the wind howled through alleys with a force that shook old houses to their frames. Michael stood at his door, staring at the blizzard swirling outside, the kind of storm that made survival difficult for anyone caught without shelter. As he locked up for the night, movement near the corner caught his eye. A figure staggered against the wind, barely visible through the haze of snow. Michael squinted, his breath fogging the glass. It was a man, clothes thin and ragged, head bent low as he tried to shield himself from the icy blast. Every instinct told Michael to shut the door and stay safe inside. But another voice, the same stirring that had driven him to give away Sarah's coat, pushed harder. He grabbed an extra blanket and rushed outside, boots sinking deep into the snow. "Hey!" he shouted against the roar of the wind. "You can't stay out here!" The man turned slowly, his face pale, lips blue from the cold. "Just need to make it through the night," he mumbled, shivering violently. "You won't," Michael said firmly. "Not in this storm. Come with me." The man resisted at first, shaking his head weakly, but Michael didn't give him a choice. He slung the blanket over the stranger's shoulders and guided him toward the house. Inside, warmth enveloped them, though the man collapsed onto the couch, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Michael hurried to the kitchen, poured hot water into a mug and placed it in the man's trembling hands. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently. "Eric," the man whispered after a pause. "Been on the streets for months. Thought I could tough it out tonight." Michael shook his head. No one's tough enough for this cold. As the hours passed, Eric's color slowly returned. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a weight Michael couldn't ignore. "Once," Eric said quietly, staring into the mug, "a stranger helped me when I was at my lowest, gave me food, a coat, told me I mattered. I don't even know his name. But I've never forgotten it." Michael sat back, stunned. "And now, here you are." Eric gave a faint smile. "I guess kindness goes in circles." The words struck Michael like a bell. They echoed Mrs. Lopez's reminder, Danny's help with the car, the priest's gentle encouragement. Again and again, life seemed to place him in these moments where giving opened a door to something greater. As the storm raged outside, Michael realized something profound. Every act of mercy he had offered, every sacrifice, every kindness, had not only returned to him but had multiplied. The coat he had once struggled to let go of had become the seed of a new life. Later that night, as Eric slept under borrowed blankets, Michael sat in the quiet living room staring at the snow hammering against the window. For the first time in weeks, his doubts loosened their grip. Maybe he wasn't delusional. Maybe he wasn't chasing shadows. Perhaps grace truly was at work, weaving through his days in ways he could finally begin to see. He whispered into the silence, "All right, God, if this is you, I believe. I don't understand it yet, but I believe." The words hung in the air, fragile but real, and in speaking them, Michael felt something shift inside him, a turning point, as though the coldest part of his soul had finally begun to thaw. The storm passed, leaving Joliet blanketed in white silence. Streets glistened under the pale sun, and icicles hung heavy from rooftops. Michael stepped outside, the air sharp in his lungs, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel crushed by winter's weight. Something inside him had changed during the long night with Eric. The act of opening his door, of sharing warmth and shelter, had unlocked a truth he couldn't ignore. Kindness was no longer something he offered occasionally. It had to become the way he lived. That realization began small. The following week, a young mother brought her car to the garage. The vehicle rattled and smoked, clearly on its last breath. She explained she couldn't pay for repairs until the end of the month. Normally, Michael would have hesitated, balancing bills against compassion, but this time he didn't. "Don't worry about the money," he said, tightening a bolt with firm hands. "You need this car running. Pay me when you can." Tears welled in her eyes. "Are you sure? Nobody else has been willing to help." Michael smiled softly. "I'm sure." Word began to spread. Neighbors noticed he no longer turned people away when they struggled to pay. Some whispered that he was foolish, too generous for his own good. Yet others saw the quiet transformation and admired it. At home, the changes deepened. Michael started cooking again, not just reheating leftovers, but real meals that filled the house with scents he hadn't smelled since Sarah was alive. He even began inviting neighbors over, sharing food with people who had no family close by. One evening, Mrs. Lopez laughed warmly at his table. "You're different these days, Michael. It's like someone lit a lamp inside you." He chuckled, embarrassed. "Maybe I just got tired of living in the dark." His relationship with his father also shifted. One Saturday, he visited John, who was watching an old war film on television. Their conversations had always been stiff, burdened by grief and pride. But this time, Michael surprised both of them. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't think life is just about surviving anymore. I think it's about giving. Even when it hurts." John squinted at him, cigarette dangling from his fingers. "You sound like a preacher." Michael smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I feel lighter. And for the first time, I don't think I'm walking in circles anymore." John didn't answer right away. But later, when Michael got up to leave, his father muttered, "Proud of you, son." It was the first time those words had passed his lips in years. Back at the factory, Michael's co-workers noticed too. Eddie, who had once laughed at his talk of miracles, grew quiet one day during lunch. "I don't get it," he said, shaking his head. "You used to be bitter all the time. Now you're, what, smiling?" "Helping everyone. What changed you?" Michael looked down at his hands, then met Eddie's eyes. "I started believing again, that's all." Eddie scoffed, but not with the same edge as before. "Believing in what?" Michael's answer was simple. "That love matters. That kindness comes back." The words hung between them, and though Eddie didn't respond, Michael noticed something soften in his friend's expression. Each day brought new opportunities, small but meaningful, to live differently. Fixing a car for free, sharing a meal, listening when someone was hurting. The more Michael gave, the more his own emptiness filled. One evening, standing on his porch as the sun set over the snow, Michael felt a peace he hadn't known since Sarah's death. For the first time, grief didn't feel like a chain, but like a memory woven into something larger. The journey wasn't finished. He knew deeper trials lay ahead, but now he faced them with a heart reshaped by kindness, ready for whatever was coming next. The call came late on a Tuesday night. Michael was just finishing dishes when the phone rang, its sharp tone slicing through the quiet. He picked it up, expecting Eddie or a neighbor. Instead, the voice on the other end was panicked. "Is this Michael Harris? This is St. Joseph's Hospital. Your father, John Harris, he's been admitted. It's serious. You need to come right away." The words hit him like ice water. He dropped the dish towel and rushed out the door, barely grabbing his keys. Snow fell lightly, swirling in the glow of street lamps as he drove through the night, his heart pounding faster with every mile. At the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic wrapped around him as he hurried down the hall. He found his father lying pale and weak in a hospital bed, tubes connected to his chest, monitors beeping steadily. A nurse explained in clipped tones, "Heart attack, emergency surgery, uncertain outcome." Michael sank into the chair beside the bed, gripping his father's hand. It felt frail, almost unfamiliar. "Dad, it's me," he whispered, fighting the tremor in his voice. "You're gonna be okay." "You have to be." John's eyes opened halfway. His voice was rough, nearly a whisper. "Mike, don't let them sugarcoat it. I might not make it through this one." Michael shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. "Don't say that. You're stronger than anyone I know." His father's lips curled faintly. "Strong doesn't beat a bad heart." Doctors wheeled John away soon after, leaving Michael alone in the waiting room. The walls closed in around him. The chairs were hard, the lights harsh, and his thoughts louder than the quiet room could contain. He buried his face in his hands and prayed harder than he had in years. "God, please," he whispered, voice cracking. "I can't lose him too. Not like I lost Sarah. If you're real, if all of this has been you, please don't take him. Give me more time. I'll do anything." The minutes dragged into hours. People came and went, families huddled together, but Michael sat alone. His chest ached, his legs trembled. Doubt and desperation tangled inside him until he thought he might break. And then it happened. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her. The same woman standing quietly in the far corner of the waiting room. No coat, no winter wear, just simple white clothing that seemed untouched by the cold of the night. Her presence was calm, luminous, almost too still for the sterile chaos of the hospital. Michael's breath caught. His voice was barely audible. "It's you." She didn't move closer, but her eyes met his, steady and serene. That same smile, the one etched forever into his memory, spread across her face. A peace unlike anything he had ever known washed over him, flooding through his veins, quieting his racing thoughts. For the first time that night he could breathe. He blinked, and she was gone. Moments later, a surgeon entered the waiting room, removing his mask. "Mr. Harris, your father made it through the surgery. It was close, but he's stable now. He'll need rest and follow-up care, but he's alive." Michael exhaled sharply, collapsing back into the chair as tears streamed down his face. Relief crashed over him like a wave. He whispered a trembling thank you, to the doctor, to the God he had doubted, and to the mysterious woman whose smile had once again appeared in the moment he needed it most. The night had tested him more deeply than he thought possible. But instead of breaking him, it left him certain of one truth. He had not been alone in that waiting room. The following morning, sunlight spilled weakly through the hospital blinds, touching the pale walls with a faint glow. Michael sat at his father's bedside, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. John slept peacefully now, machines monitoring his steady breaths. Relief had carried Michael through the night, but another feeling had taken root as well, a certainty he could no longer dismiss. He replayed the moment in the waiting room again and again. The woman's calm figure, her serene eyes, the smile that radiated a peace he couldn't explain. She had appeared when despair nearly swallowed him, just as she had in Chicago. He whispered to himself, "It wasn't a dream, it wasn't my imagination. It was real." Later that afternoon, when his father was stable enough for visitors, Michael slipped out and walked across town to St. Mary's. The winter air bit at his skin, but inside he felt a strange warmth urging him forward. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors, stepping into the stillness of the sanctuary. Candles flickered like stars against the shadows, and the faint scent of incense lingered in the air. Father Thomas was near the altar, arranging prayer books. He looked up as Michael entered. "Back again, Michael? You look as if something heavy has happened." Michael's voice trembled. "I saw her again, Father, at the hospital. When I thought I was losing my dad, she was there." Father Thomas set down the books, giving Michael his full attention. "Tell me." Michael recounted everything: the long night, his desperate prayer, the woman's sudden appearance, her smile that filled the room with peace. His words tumbled out with urgency, as though releasing them might help him make sense of it all. When he finished, his chest heaved, and he looked to the priest with pleading eyes. "Who is she? Why me?" The priest's expression softened. He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Michael, from what you've told me, I believe you've been visited by the Blessed Mother, the Virgin Mary herself." The words struck like a bell, resonating deep inside Michael. He staggered back, shaking his head. "Mary? No, that can't be. Why would she come to me? I'm no saint. I've doubted, I've cursed God, I've failed him so many times. Why me?" Father Thomas's gaze was steady. "Because grace isn't given to the perfect. It's given to those who need it. You opened your heart when you gave away that coat, even though it cost you. That act of selfless love may have been the doorway through which she chose to reveal herself." Tears welled in Michael's eyes. He covered his face with his hands, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve this." The priest shook his head gently. "None of us do. That's what makes it grace. She smiled at you, Michael, because heaven wanted you to know you are seen, you are loved, and you are not forgotten." Michael dropped his hands, his vision blurred with tears. The weight of years of doubt and grief broke loose inside him, and for the first time since Sarah's death he wept openly, not in despair but in awe. He whispered through trembling lips, "She smiled at me." "She really smiled at me?" Father Thomas nodded, his voice low and reverent. "Yes, and that smile is a blessing. Carry it with you. Let it guide how you live." As Michael knelt before the altar, the flickering candlelight seemed brighter than before. He felt as though the silence itself embraced him. He no longer needed proof, no longer needed to argue with doubt. The truth was written across his heart. He had been touched by a miracle, chosen not for his strength but for his brokenness. And in that brokenness, something new had been born. The revelation at St. Mary's left Michael with a fire in his chest he couldn't contain. The world around him hadn't changed. The snow still piled on the sidewalks, the factory still roared with machines, the bills still arrived on time, but something within him had been reborn. He no longer walked through his days with the weight of emptiness. Now, he carried a smile not his own, a smile that felt eternal, alive in his memory. In the weeks that followed, Michael began to act differently. It wasn't dramatic at first, but steady, like water reshaping stone. He noticed the people he used to pass without a glance: the man sleeping under the bridge near the train tracks, the woman counting coins at the grocery store, the teenager shivering at the bus stop without gloves. Each face stirred something in him. Where once he might have looked away, now he stepped closer. One cold evening he walked past a group of men huddled near a fire barrel. Instead of ignoring them, he stopped and offered hot coffee he had brought in a thermos. One of the men, startled, asked, "Why would you give this to us?" Michael's answer came without hesitation. "Because someone once gave to me when I didn't deserve it." Word spread through town. At the garage, Michael began repairing cars for struggling families without charging full price. Sometimes he asked for nothing at all. Mrs. Lopez, who had once told him kindness circles back, now shook her head in wonder. "Michael Harris, you're building yourself a reputation. Folks are saying you're some kind of saint." He laughed lightly. "Not a saint, Mrs. Lopez, just someone trying to give back what was given to me." The change reached even his father. John had always valued toughness over tenderness, but after his heart attack he was forced to lean on his son in ways he never had before. One afternoon, as Michael helped him adjust his blanket in the living room, John muttered, I don't get it. You should be bitter. You lost more than most. But here you are, helping everyone, smiling like you know something the rest of us don't. Michael met his father's weary eyes. I don't know more, Dad. I just believe now. I believe kindness matters, and I believe God hasn't abandoned us. For once, John didn't argue. Instead, he looked away, his throat tightening with words he couldn't form. Encouraged by Father Thomas, Michael soon started something bigger. Using part of his savings, he rented a small run-down storefront downtown. He patched the cracks himself, painted the walls, and set up a few tables. It wasn't fancy, but it became a space where people in need could come for warmth, food, and company. Volunteers joined him, and together they began serving hot meals on weekends. Michael called it Sarah's Place, naming it after his late wife, knowing she would have wanted nothing more than to see others cared for. On the opening day, as neighbors filed in, Michael stood by the door shaking hands and welcoming everyone with a quiet joy. Eddie showed up too, curiosity pulling him in. He walked around, taking it all in, then pulled Michael aside. "You really did it," Eddie said, disbelief in his voice. "I thought you'd lost your mind chasing miracles, but this is real." Michael smiled softly. "That's the point, Eddie. Miracles aren't just visions. They're what happens when we choose to love." For the first time, even skeptics began to see the transformation not as delusion, but as truth lived out. And though Michael never boasted of the woman who smiled at him, her presence was in everything he did, her peace echoing in every act of compassion, her blessing alive in every meal served. The man who once walked in grief and silence now walked in purpose. And though challenges still loomed, Michael knew the path ahead was no longer his alone. Spring crept slowly into Joliet, melting away the last stubborn piles of snow and filling the air with the scent of thawing earth. For Michael, each sunrise now carried a sense of renewal. Where once mornings had been burdens to endure, now they felt like beginnings, opportunities to give, to serve, to live differently. Sarah's Place had become more than just a storefront with a few tables. It was alive with laughter, conversation, and hope. Families came for hot meals. The homeless found warmth and blankets, and neighbors rediscovered community. Michael worked tirelessly, often cooking, cleaning, and fixing broken chairs long after others had gone home. Yet exhaustion no longer weighed him down. Purpose gave him strength. One evening, as he wiped down a table, a young boy tugged on his sleeve. "Mister, why do you do all this? You don't even know us." Michael knelt, meeting the boy's curious eyes. "Because someone once showed me kindness when I didn't expect it, and that kindness changed everything." The boy tilted his head, thoughtful. "Then maybe I'll do the same one day." Those simple words struck Michael deeply. He realized the miracle wasn't just about what he had seen, it was about what he could pass on. At home, he often visited his father, who was recovering slowly from surgery. Their conversations had softened, no longer sharp with judgment. One night, John surprised him. "Mike, I don't know if I believe everything you say about visions and miracles, but I believe in what I see, and what I see is my son alive again, not just breathing, but living. That's enough for me." Michael's eyes burned and he squeezed his father's hand. "That's all I wanted, Dad. For us to be whole again." On quiet nights, Michael still thought of Sarah. He would sit by her photograph, the house filled with the aroma of soup simmering on the stove, and whisper, "I hope you'd be proud." He no longer spoke through tears of despair, but through gratitude, carrying her memory into each act of kindness. And always, always, the smile returned to him. The serene, luminous smile of the woman outside Union Station, the one that had followed him through storms, doubts, and revelations. He carried it not as a haunting, but as a blessing, an eternal reminder that heaven had touched his life in the simplest of gestures. As he walked the streets of his town, neighbors waved, children called his name, and strangers greeted him with warmth. Michael no longer felt invisible. He no longer felt forgotten. His story had become a quiet testimony, not shouted from rooftops, but lived out in service, proving that miracles were not distant or abstract. They were here in the choices people made to love one another. One Sunday after Mass, Father Thomas approached him outside the church. "Michael," he said softly, "you've been given a gift. Not just the vision, but the strength to live by it. Never let that smile fade from your heart." Michael nodded, eyes bright. "I won't, Father. It's with me always." As the bells rang and families spilled into the sunlight, Michael stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. Life was far from perfect. Bills still came, problems still rose, grief still lingered, but he no longer faced them alone. He walked with a smile that was not his own, a grace that had carried him from despair into hope. And to you listening to this story, let me remind you, miracles begin with small acts, often when we least expect them. Michael gave away a coat and in return received a blessing that transformed his life forever. So before we close, I invite you, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories like this, stories that prove hope can rise in the darkest places. And don't stop here. Click on the video suggested on your screen and continue this journey of faith, kindness, and the power of one simple choice, because sometimes a single act can carry the eternal smile of heaven.